Hi, Writers. Cruz here. Thank you so much for joining me. In this video, we are going to be focused on a sample essay which scored a 5 out of 6 on the Accuplacer Writeplacer English as a Second Language sample essay. If this is something that you are interested in, please stay tuned. If not, I wish you happy video hunting. Please keep in mind that this channel has other videos on analyzing poetry or writing prompts for other tests, whether it's just regular Accuplacer, Writeplacer, and also the ACT, and even some stuff, some videos on Common App and the Common App prompts. And there is definitely going to be more to come, including videos on the IELTS. So that particular test, be on the lookout for upcoming videos on the IELTS. If you do not know what that stands for, I can assure you you will if you watch some of the videos. So with that said, writers, let's go ahead and jump into our 5 out of 6 essay. And the first thing I want to do is sort of zoom out and see what the student created from a zooming out standpoint, and then we'll go into each paragraph and dissect it sentence by sentence. So the first thing that I notice is I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 particular paragraphs. One of these paragraphs right here really feels less like a paragraph and more like just a couple of sentences. So in this part right here, we see that in this particular essay. But again, with that in mind, I'm just going to go ahead and count it as a possible paragraph. So one thing I really like about this particular essay is the student did create separate islands or separate, paragraphs separating ideas. Hopefully this student, flowed from one to the next, and that each paragraph is its own island. But as of now, as you can see, if we zoom out, we see 6 separate paragraphs, um, or you could call it 5.5 paragraphs. And we will now take it one paragraph at a time, and start to zoom in here. So that's one thing that is a positive that this student did. For those of you who are joining us perhaps maybe for the first time, this essay, the topic had to do with what to do if you were awarded or given or inherited a large sum of money. And the goal is for the essay, the 4 things that the scorers are looking for is not only word use, but also sentence use, grammar, and the organization and development of the essay. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. Again, we'll start with paragraph 1, and then we'll take it, as I said earlier, sentence by sentence. Please keep in mind, writers, that a lot of times when I record these videos, this is the first time that I'm seeing the essay. And oftentimes, pretty much 9.9 out of 10 times, again, I try to do what's called a cold reading. And I do that so that you and I are reading it for the first time together, and it's not really rehearsed. And part of that is a good thing, I think, because I don't really know what to expect. And so it creates a sense of suspense for you all and also for me, because you get an authentic response to what I'm reading rather than a canned response to what it is that I'm reading. So I really prefer that style of a video recording rather than, again, having everything rehearsed and perfect. I think that is not beneficial. And I feel like when I'm writing as well, I do the same, because writing and reading, and essay writing is a process, and it takes practice, and it's, you don't really rehearse it. You just kind of jump in and get started. So let's take a look at paragraph number 1, writers. Thank you again so much for joining me and for subscribing to our channel here. If I received a large sum of money, for instance, $25 million, I would spend a portion of it to the countries that were hit by the biggest natural disaster recorded in the history of the world. After that, I would, of course, put some of that money into my bank account, or I would plan on opening a small business. Finally, I would send the money that is left over to my country, Pakistan, to the poor people over there. Okay, so first thing that is great, positive. Number one, they mentioned the topic. Number two, they're telling us what they would do with the money that they received. So, in one instance, they say that they are going to give it to countries hit by big natural disasters. So, I suspect that that would be one paragraph. Another paragraph will be talking about how they would put some of that money into a bank account. Another paragraph may or may not, because they use the word or, the conjunction or, about opening a small business. And then another paragraph would be sending the money over to Pakistan to help the poor people in that particular country. So that's great because, again, the writer is basically, they've organized their introduction paragraph to let us know, hey, this is how the rest of my essay is going to be developed and organized, which is fantastic. Now let's take a look at the sentence and sort of grammar use and maybe even some of the word usage. First sentence, if I received a large sum of money, for instance, $25 million, exclamation point. Let me read that the way it should be read. If I received a large sum of money, for instance, $25 million. And that's how that sentence would sound because that's what the purpose of an exclamation point is. So, one of the things that we notice, right, writers, is that this first sentence is a fragment. Why? Because the student started with what's called a subordinating conjunction. I like to call them dependent markers because they're letting us know that a dependent clause is on the way. And so, if is serving as a subordinating conjunction or dependent marker. But they have a comma, for instance, $25 million, comma, they need a comma after $25 million. Why? Because this is not a complete sentence. It's a fragment, it's a dependent clause, and what needs to follow a dependent clause would be an independent clause or a complete sentence. However, in this case, the student used a comma and then just said, for instance, $25 million. For instance, $25 million is not a complete sentence. If I received a large sum of money is also not a complete sentence. Both, this part, the dependent clause does contain a subject and a verb. This is just giving us an example, and it should have a comma after it, and then the rest of the sentence should come. Um, with that in mind, right, writers, first sentence is a fragment. It wanted maybe to be a complex sentence. The student maybe wanted to make a compound complex sentence. However, as it is written, it is right now a fragment. With that said, again, they brought up the topic, which is fantastic. Next sentence, I would send a portion of it to the countries that were hit hardest, that were hit by the biggest, my bad, right, writers. I would send a portion of it to the countries that were hit by the biggest natural disasters recorded in the history of the world. Okay, I really like how they stayed, again, if I received, and so they're sort of creating this sort of future tense and they keep it going with I would. So what they would do, so they keep the same tense as far as verb tenses go, which is great. I would send send a portion of it to the countries that were hit by the biggest natural disaster recorded in the history of the world. So we know where that money's going to go. We know it's probably going to multiple countries. What we don't know is what the biggest natural disaster recorded in the history of the world is, which makes it interesting because, again, we're sort of left in suspense by the writer, which I find, again, interesting. And it makes it like, ooh, I wonder what is the biggest natural disaster recorded in the history of the world? We'll find out. And so I think that's really interesting. With that said, their second sentence is set up really as a complex sentence because that is acting like a dependent marker So in this case, that were hit, I would send a portion of it to the countries. Now, if we were writing this correctly, we would say something like, I would send a portion of it to the countries hit by the biggest natural disaster recorded in the history of the world. We would not need that were, but as they have it set up, that were hit, in this case, it would be a complex sentence. The next sentence after that, I would, of course, put some of that money into my bank account, or I would plan on opening a small business. So in this case, the way they have this one set up, I don't think they meant after and that as dependent markers. And so I definitely know that this part right here, it's really not serving as, again, subordinating conjunctions after that. They're just meaning like later in time. So after that, comma would be great. I would, of course, put some of the money into my bank account, comma, or I would plan on opening a small business. So in this case, this is really serving as a compound sentence. And I believe that that was really the intention of the writer. Again, notice how they stay in that future tense after that, I would, what they will be doing in the future. And then they use, and after that really is serving as a transition, which is great. Then they have finally, another transition word, finally, comma, and you could do that. Finally, comma, I would send the money that is left over to my country, Pakistan, to the poor people over there. So in this case, this is serving as a complex sentence because they have, finally, I would send the money. That's our independent clause, followed by our dependent clause that is left over to my country, Pakistan, to the poor people over there. As far as word use, they used more words than necessary to get their ideas across. So oftentimes, right, writers, less is more. So they could have said something like, finally, comma, I would send any leftover money to the poor people who live in my country, Pakistan. Something like that. They were a little bit what is called wordy, wordy. You can also say verbose. So they added more words than were necessary to get their idea across, their point across. With that said, right, writers, every idea is clear. It's crystal clear on what this student wants to do with the money, and there's no confusion really about it. As far as the sentence structure goes, again, we have a fragment followed by a complex sentence, followed by what really wants to be a compound sentence, and they just needed to put that comma right after bank account, followed by a complex sentence. Now let's go to paragraph number 2 and take a look and see if they focused on the natural disaster. If they did, that's going to further enhance the organization and development of their essay. Out of $25 million, I would send $5 million to the countries where the tsunami hit to help the countries recover from this tragic event. The country can supply needs for the citizens, such as food and shelter, with the extra money they will be receiving. The money can also help the cost to rebuild the vacationing places that were also destroyed by the tsunami. Okay, so now they've referenced the natural disaster that they were referring to, and they were very specific in the amount of money that they would give to countries hit by the tsunami. So this is helping their cause as far as creating that organization and development that they need in this paragraph. Not only that, but they're very specific. So out of the 25 million, they specify how much. Out of the 25 out of $25 million, comma, they should have had, I would send 5 million to the countries where the tsunami hit to help the countries recover from this tragic event. So this is, the sentence is set up really like a complex sentence with the dependent marker, or in this case, the subordinating conjunction being the word where the tsunami hit to help the countries recover from this tragic event. Again, the student was a bit verbose. They added extra words, more words than they needed to, but it is clear as far as the idea they're trying to get across, which is important. Obviously, they should have capitalized I here right after 25 million, and they could have used maybe a comma. Some spacing issues here, some spacing right there. But, again, sometimes I'm like, is the point, did the student make their point? Is their idea clear to the reader? And yes, it is. It would have been nice to know what countries they were and being even more specific on the countries. However, they just kept it broad, which is fine. And then it says the country, so they went plural, and then it says the country can, so they went singular there, which can again cause a little bit of confusion, but again, at least it's still on topic. The country can supply needs for the citizens, such as food and shelter, with the extra money they will be receiving. So this is again set up almost like a complex sentence. Um, because again, they say the country can supply needs, and then for the citizens, such as food and shelter, with the extra money they will be receiving. So we kind of have an embedded clause, they will be receiving, also inside of the country can supply needs. And so it's almost set up like a complex sentence. One could argue, again, the student became a bit verbose, adding extra information and words that were not necessarily needed. So, for example, they could say something like, the country can supply needs such as food and shelter, um, with the money they will be receiving, and not all the extra stuff for the citizens, etc. Obviously, it's sort of implied if you're giving money to a country, that money is going to be used for food and shelter for its residents. Um, that said, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next sentence, or the last sentence in paragraph 2. The money can also help the cost to rebuild the vacationing places that were also destroyed by the tsunami. In this case, the student did write a pretty clear cut, complex sentence using the dependent marker that, or the subordinating conjunction that were also destroyed by the tsunami. That is a dependent clause, and the first part is an independent clause. The money can also help, or would also help, the cost to rebuild the vacationing, a little spelling issue, but nothing serious, to rebuild the vacationing places that were also destroyed by the tsunami. So we have pretty much like a complex followed by another complex followed by another complex. So we've got some back to back to back complex sentences, which does negatively impact what is called the sentence fluency. So the sentence fluency is where you have a nice mix or blend of, here's a simple sentence, then I'm going to throw in a complex sentence. Now I'm going to throw in a compound sentence. Now I'm going to throw in a simple sentence. Now I'm going to throw in a compound complex sentence. But again, until you feel more comfortable with grammar, you're not really able to sort of, and especially if you've got the timer ticking, you're not really focused on that as much. But as you get more seasoned with grammar, you're like, hey, I've written too many back to back complex sentences. Let me change this up a little bit. So again, looking at the pros and cons, the positives and the drawbacks of this particular paragraph. But again, their idea is clear. It's come across. I would have just stayed in that future tense. The country, could supply needs for the citizens. The money could also help, rather than can also help, because then we're moving from future to present tense. So just keep that in mind, writers. Moving on to paragraph 3, they talked about putting some of the money into a bank account or plan on opening a small business. So let's see where they move next and see if they talk about a bank account or a small business. Now, because they use the conjunction or, they're basically giving themselves one of the two options. And so, we'll see what they come up with. In paragraph 3, writers, Well, after the money is sent to the countries, I would invest the $10 million, um, or yeah, the $10 million into a small business that will keep my money coming in. A smart man always invests to double or even triple the amount of his profits. I would buy a small franchise, such as Subway or a Burger King, to keep the money flowing. Okay, so they're sort of setting this up like I have 25 million, 5 million's going here, and now 10 million is going to something else. I do like that they basically talked about opening up a small business. They mentioned a bank account. We don't see that just yet, but we do see the small business. And so that's good. And they did put the conjunction or, so it gave them the option of one of the two, and they did not necessarily have to do both. The issue that I see with this sentence or this paragraph, writers, again, on topic, stayed very focused in what they were talking about within the paragraph. The student is just verbose. Again, too many words, when we can do, less is more. Well, after the money is sent to the countries, comma, I would invest another 10 million, because it's not because then it makes it sound like if you just say the 10 million, it makes it seem as if the student only has 15 million. And that's not the case if they imagine themselves having 25 million. So we would say I would invest another 10 million into a small business that will keep my money coming in. This particular first sentence here, and they did use a transition word, sort of well after. This is a complex sentence. So, well after the money is sent to the countries, comma, I would invest the 10 million into a small business that will keep my money coming in. So we've got a DC, a dependent clause, followed by an independent clause in the middle, and then ending with another dependent clause that will keep my money coming in. So a complex sentence. However, this one is a little bit different because they have a DC, IC, DC. They should have placed a comma after the money is sent to the countries, comma, I would invest, another 10 million, and then going from there. Obviously, we see some doubling of the and I needs to be capitalized, and yes, only one M in coming in, but the idea is clear and the student gets their idea across. Next sentence, a smart man always invests to double or even triple the amount of his profits. Great little saying there. I think that shows a little bit of personality. And that's a simple sentence that he brought in. So, a simple sentence after a complex sentence. A smart man always invests to double or even triple. He could have just said his amount of profits, and that would have been enough. But he just said the amount of his profits, which is again just a little bit wordy. But I do like that the student brought in a simple sentence, which is nice. A little bit of a break for the reader in the sentence fluency. Last sentence, it says, I would buy a small franchise, such as Subway or a Burger King, to keep the money flowing. And so in this case, it's sort of set up as an embedded clause at the end, the money flowing. It's almost like it's trying to be a complex sentence. The student may have also just really wanted to keep it maybe as a simple sentence, but I'm sort of reading it as a complex and or what would be called maybe a more advanced simple sentence. I would buy, and I like how they stayed in future tense. You know, I would buy a small franchise. They could have had a comma, such as a Subway. Subway should have been capitalized, such as a Subway or a Burger King, to keep the money flowing. I really like the way that flows in that particular paragraph. Now we go on to paragraph 4, which is almost like a little sentence or a couple of sentences here. Let's see what they have. Of course, I'm also going to put some money in the bank to have a safe place just in case the business doesn't function probably. And maybe they meant properly in that, rather than probably, doesn't function properly, but they said probably. I would put $5 million in the bank. Okay, so in this case, right, writers, what they should have done to keep the ordering in check, because up here they said after that I would, of course, put some of the money of that money into my bank account, comma, and I would plan on opening a small business. Because or is an either or situation, so you have a choice of the two, but not both. And because they brought up the bank account, they should have used the conjunction and. So, comma, and I would plan on opening a small business. The other issue is the ordering. Because they said bank account first, then your paragraphs should follow that same ordering. So it should go from the bank account, then going into the small business, or of course I would, after that, I would plan on opening a small business, comma, and I would of course put some of that money into my bank account. So there's always an opportunity as well, right, writers, to then flip, you know, switch the ordering out of this sentence up here in the particular, in this particular essay. That the student could have changed the ordering in this part, or again, made these two sentences made them come first, followed by the well after. So just an ordering issue, and that could take off points as far as the organization of the essay. Now let's take a look at what the student actually put, again, and looking at the sentences, the sentence structure. Of course, comma, again, they use a transition word, which is great. Yes, a space. Yes, uppercase on I. Of course, comma, I am also going to put, or I would also put some money in the bank to have a safe place just in case the business does not function properly. And again, this I would undo contractions and just say does not, rather than rather than doesn't, because when you use contractions, it is considered informal. And when you're writing an academic paper, you want to be as formal as possible. In that said, the way the student wrote this up, um, it's almost again set up like a complex sentence, just in case the business does not function. And again, I think they meant the word properly, rather than probably. So that's what I would say about that sentence. And then it says, I would, again, we're coming back to future tense. I would put $5 million in the bank. And that is a perfectly written, simple sentence. That said, some could also argue, what about Cruz about this 10 million, 5 million? Shouldn't the 5 be spelled out? Technically, you are correct. Like when it's the number is 9 or lower, you should write out the number 5 rather than, whereas 25 or anything above 10, you can just write the numeric number. But again, I don't think they would have gotten a lot of points taken off for that. However, if you were thinking that, you are correct. Numbers, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 should technically be spelled out when you're writing an essay. My biggest issue, though, is this. Number one, they kind of confuse the tense. I'm also going to put, rather than I would also put, in the first sentence. And then again, the ordering, this should have come first, followed by spending the money on a small business. That said, let's go ahead and move on to paragraph number 5. Finally, with the 5 million that I would still have left over, I would send that money to my country to help the poor make a living. My country, which is Pakistan, has the largest population of lower or even no class citizens. I am one of the lucky ones who has a golden opportunity to come here and make something of myself. So I would send the money over there to support the poor and provide them with food and the basic essentials of life. Okay, very personal paragraph, and that's definitely one thing that I love about this particular paragraph, because we get a sense of the student, their personality, and you get more information even about their homeland. their home country. So with this, in this case, I would have maybe placed a comma after, maybe finally, or they could have said finally, comma, with finally, comma, with the 5 million that I will still have left over, comma, I would send that money to my country to help the poor make a living. So in this case, it's set up pretty much like a complex sentence. Then we have, and again, they should have said, finally with the 5 million, um, with the 5 million left over, comma, I would send that money to my country to help the poor make a living. And then they go into what my country is. My country, which is Pakistan, has the largest population of lower or even no class citizens. So that is set up as a complex sentence. The only issue that I have is no class citizens. So again, as someone from living in the United States and from the United States, I'm a little bit confused of understanding what no class means. So maybe what they mean is of lower class, of lower or even, you know, um, I'm thinking that no class, meaning they're not even in a class system. They are so poor that they're sort of the forgotten citizens. So I might have used something more specific, has the largest population of lower or even forgotten citizens. Because that's really maybe what I think the writer is trying to get across, that these are, people who just don't, no one even recognizes as almost as if human, as they're human beings. They're just sort of like they have no caste. And so I think that's what they're trying to get across. But in English translation, no class um, is a completely different context. So if you have no class, it basically means that you have no manners, which is very different than I think what the student wanted to get across. So that said, that is a complex sentence. Moving on to the next one, which, by the way, is the dependent marker or the subordinating conjunction. Next sentence, I am one of the lucky ones who has a golden opportunity, or who had a golden opportunity to come here and make something of myself. So in this case, this is also set up as a complex sentence. In this case, the dependent marker or the subordinating conjunction, really it's called a relative clause. And technically this one would be to which. So is that. So that, which, and who, and whom, those are really called relative clauses. Um, and they're letting you know that you're embedding a dependent clause within a larger independent clause. But and that's what the student wrote, which is an advanced way of writing. In the next sentence they said, so I would send the money over there to support the poor and provide them with food and the basic essentials of life. They just forgot the period there. Obviously the I should be capitalized. They could have made this what would be a pretty amazing compound complex sentence, this whole thing, if they had placed a comma after myself. So I am one of the lucky ones who has had, or yeah, has had the golden opportunity, or has had a golden opportunity to come here and make something of myself, comma. So I would send the money over there to support the poor, and provide them with food and the basic essentials of life, period. And that could have been a beautiful compound complex. That said, right writers, again, very targeted, very focused. We know they're talking about Pakistan. We know how that money, or that $5 million is going to be spent there, and we know how it's going to be spent, which is, again, very important when it comes to the organization and the development of the essay. As earlier, they did get caught up with a little bit, too many words. So they were a bit wordy or verbose. We have a couple of spelling issues, and this idea of, future, past, present tense. But again, the idea is clear to the reader, besides the no class part right there. Okay, that said, right writers, moving on to paragraph 6, or what would be considered the last paragraph. In conclusion, these are the three things I would do if I suddenly received a large sum of money. Maybe I will donate a small portion of it to St. Peter's College, and then I can have my name on a big wall in of the campuses. Wouldn't that be something? Okay, so I really love that they just went on a different sort of topic at the end. And it wasn't technically three things, but really four things. So I would say something like, in conclusion, these are the four possibilities or the four ways rather than things, because a thing is usually a physical or a tangible object, whereas, these are the four ways in which I would spend the money if I suddenly received a large sum of it. And that may be a little bit more clear. I do like, maybe I, might also, instead of I will donate, I might also donate a small portion of it to St. Peter's College. I probably would have put a period after that, St. Peter's College, period. Then, and I think they meant then as opposed to than. When you're using than, THAN, you're saying that there's a comparison, that you're going to compare two things. But in this case, I think they meant then, THEN, comma, then I can have my name on a big wall. And maybe it's meant instead of in of the campuses, on one of the campuses, comma, wouldn't that be something? Or now in this case, it's really interesting because they have a contraction, and it actually sounds better to have the contraction, wouldn't that be something, instead of would that not also be something, because now that sounds a little bit too awkward. So in this case, this contraction really does work. Wouldn't that be something? And question mark, they use the question mark correctly. I really love that ending, because again, they have this idea of like, hey, I could donate to, a college, my college, or maybe the college it is that they aspire to go to. um, so I think that's really interesting. As far as, they get their idea across. Again, it just was a little bit, just a couple of things that I would change to be even more clear. And sometimes, writers, it's better to separate than trying to make these really big sentences when a simple sentence will do. Maybe, comma, I will donate a small portion of it to St. Peter's College, period. I can have my name on a big wall on one of the campuses, period. And maybe they could have said, wouldn't, or that might be something, or but I like the wouldn't that be something. I really like that. And in this case, the contraction actually again works. As far as the structure goes, in conclusion, these are the three things I would do if I suddenly received a large sum of money. That is a straight independent clause, followed by a dependent clause, and even a little embedded I would do also within that, but it's still a complex sentence. Maybe I will donate a small portion of it to St. Peter's College, comma, they should add a comma after college, and then comma, or and I can have my name on a big wall on one of the campuses. That's almost setting up as a compound sentence, and then maybe put a colon here, and wouldn't that be something? um or a period there, and then just ended with a simple sentence. But as they sort of have this set up, it's they have what's called a comma splice, because you have, wouldn't that be something, and that would be considered a complete sentence, and then you've got two independent clauses, really there, so it's almost like a set up as really a compound sentence with three back-to-back independent clauses, or three back-to-back sentences. So just a couple of issues, but again, the ideas are clear as far as, what they're trying to get across. Again, changing things to ways, We've got some tense issues as far as, past, present, future. But what I really, again, appreciated is that this student definitely was able to get their ideas across based on what they wrote. So this covers, sample essay number 2, which also scored a 5. So as Accuplacer Writeplacer set it up, they gave you 2 sample essays, which both scored, ones, twos, threes, fours, and fives, and the sixes, which will be coming up in our next videos, the next 2 videos where I look at 2 sample scores of 6. So I really, again, appreciate that some of the students' personality came out. I appreciate how they stayed really, way on topic, which is awesome. There was very little confusion. And so it's really nice to have voice, right, writers as well in your essays. It's okay to bring out, some of your personality within the writing. There's just sort of, there can be a fine line between too much voice where it takes away from your writing, or just enough voice where we get a sense of your personality and who you are, and it works to your benefit. With that said, right, writers, I hope this video worked to your benefit and that you were able to glean something from this process, and that um, you perhaps are feeling more comfortable about taking the Accuplacer Writeplacer. And again, sometimes you just have to jump in if you think you're ready and just see what kind of score you would get, and then take it from there. Thank you so much, Right Writers, for watching this video. Cruise out. Love you guys. I appreciate you all subscribing. Please keep the comments, the likes. Please keep those coming. And again, if there are any videos which interest you, please let me know so I can make videos on those different topics.